Darling, we've had one hell of a time, but the question on everybody's mind, where is the
Let us transition to being more specific, and let's talk about your book, Dead Dogs Bite.
Okay.
It came out. It's in this. I'm going to hold it up, even though this is a podcast, because eventually it'll be on YouTube. Maybe. It's a beautiful hardcover.
Mm.
Look at that.
Love that.
Look, I realized how to sell it to the podcast audience. I hit it.
You knock it.
ASMR.
Yeah.
You do some
That's-
ASMR.
You can tell the stock just by hearing
I'm going to do the
knock.
ASMR.
Okay.
That's a book.
Could you slide your hand across it?
Oh.
That's a book.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
nice. That's
Yeah,
actually
maybe
really good.
rifle through some of the pages.
Like, you're getting too much. It's too
All
much.
right,
I don't want to get paper cuts. I don't want to risk my finger. These are how I make my money. I can't risk
Ideas will bleed if
Ideas
Matt
will-
gets fucking paper. cut.
Also, I'm gonna sell this book when the podcast is over, so I can't get blood on it. Tyler, Dead Dogs Bite, 4-issue mini series from Dark Horse Comics.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the book is?
The book is a sort of slow burn mystery story. You follow the main character. Her name is Jo Brady, and her best friend has sort of disappeared.
What's her best friend's name?
Her name is Cormac Guffin.
Very clever.
Pretty good name, I would say.
A friend of the podcast, Ed Brisson, told me he wanted to murder you when he found out that you named her that. But we'll go on.
Because he wanted to use it, or
Yeah,
because he
'cause
thought I was an
If he-
app, or as Matteo Pizzolo.
Griffin, cut that.
As
Yeah.
Matt Pizzolo of Black Mass said to me on the phone when I told him, and he went, "You're a fucking asshole." But in the other way, where he was like, "You're so like you were probably so pleased with yourself when you came up with that."
Yeah, I think that was Brisson's take. I think you made a lot of enemies with that one.
Yeah,
Which is good. Which is always good when you're a character.
Cormac goes missing, and nobody in the town seems to care. And so it's Joe. It's up to Joe to try and find out what happened to her friend. It's a bit of a Twilight Zone-y, slightly semi-surreal mystery story.
Yeah, it is.
Apologies if this is a dumb question. Is this your first time writing a book?
Yeah, it's the first time I've done like a full story script. Yeah.
Yeah, right. How did that transition? How did that feel? I mean, was that scary at all, or was it just?
Oh, it was
kind of
awful.
exciting?
It was the
Okay.
worst fucking thing in the world.
Was it really?
Oh yeah. No, I I started sleepwalking the week before it was going to come out
Wow.
out of anxiety.
Okay.
My wife would like find me in the tub, just like standing in there. She'd be like, "What are you doing?" I'd be like, "I'm going to the bathroom." But I'd just be standing in the tub, and she'd be like, "Okay, but let's go to bed." But I would call Matthew and be like, "You're such a dick. Like, why didn't you tell me how horrible this feels to like?"
It was pretty funny to watch.
Yeah.
Wow. I felt really. It was such a weird thing because like I was so excited for you to write stuff because I knew you wanted to do it, and then I was like, "Oh, it's gonna be great." And you sent me the first script, and I was like, "Oh man, it's really good." And then you were like, "I fucking hate this."
Oh my god! See,
And
this opens up 100 more questions for me. This is fascinating.
I guess my first question is, this is my favorite book you've worked on, because you're sort of unencumbered by some writer telling you what to do. How did that feel for you? Did that feel good? I know that it felt terrible to write it yourself, but did it feel good to be out from being tied to some maniacal tyrant?
Yeah.
Did that feel nice?
You're because you're quite the tyrant, Matthew. It was. I mean, it was fun to. If it was really, setting aside the sort of you have the anxiety that builds up about like, oh crap, like if this comes out and it's terrible, then you have no one to blame but yourself. Like if people hate this, then they're like, that's on you. And I was writing stuff and being like, I think this is good. Like I think this is pretty okay. And it's exciting too to learn more sort of the craft of writing and what that is, as opposed to being like, because on 4Kids, me and Matt would talk about it and come up with ideas and I'd throw things in or whatever. But, it was Matt going and writing a full script. It wasn't like I was a part of that craft process of here's how we break down a story across 5 issues. It was more just like, I would participate, but it wasn't to the same degree of the amount of work Matt had to do to get it there. Whereas I think it's changed a little bit now, even with Furthest Place, where I think me and Matt sort of, we almost beat out each issue, sort of the here's the signposts we got to hit on the arcs and different things. And then Matt goes and writes a full script. But it feels a little bit more now that I've gone and sort of done the process. I feel a lot more confident in sort of, you have those instincts. I think everyone does when you start doing writing and different things, where you understand like the thing you said earlier, Matt, right? Where it's like certain things become second nature, certain things you understand like, oh, well, I got to have this thing here. I got to have that. And it becomes a lot more, there's a lot more confidence. The more you do. This isn't the question you asked either, by the way. The not having you there sucked, because it was a thing that like was, that was a big source of the anxiety, where it's like with 4Kids, Furthest Place, these other things, like at least I had somebody else to like go through it with me if people hated it. Whereas in this one, it's like, that was it. And
you fully went into it because you colored and lettered the book yourself also.
I wanted to do that. That was the thing, coming from thinking I was going to be one of those like more alternative lit indie comics people, was I wanted to handle every aspect of making a comic. And so that was really rewarding in the end to have done it. It's also exhausting, like physically and emotionally. But it was good. I'm going to do it again.
Are you in a good place about the book now? Do you look at it and you like it?
Yeah, no, I'm very proud. Okay. There's things, like I think with anybody with books, there's things where I like, there's a few things you'd go back and change, but I think that's true of anything. Like, given it, we looked at 4Kids, the first version of the first issue that me and Matt did, I totally redrew it by the time it actually came out. And that's maybe the first and last time I should ever have done something like that. I think at a certain point, it's going to have flaws no matter what you do. Like, just put it out there, and that's the best thing you can do.
When did that transition happen of raking yourself over the coals of like, I hate this, I'm stressed out, and to getting to a point where you feel good about it? Like, how did that happen?
It's the hardback of it came out last September. So it took about a year.
So it had to be fully out before you felt okay about it.
Oh, I mean, like 2 months ago, I started to feel good about it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm not, and like, that's not a joke. Like, it's a thing. 2 months ago, I started to be like, for instance, like I wouldn't even, Matt was like, oh, we should have it in the shop. And I was like, yeah, for sure. And then I just wouldn't.
Yeah, he wouldn't do it.
I wouldn't get it any comp. He'd be like, do you have comps? And I'd be like, no, they're all gone. I had comps. I just didn't.
Okay.
We would do when we'd set up signings. I was like, yeah, you should bring them or tell the store. And he was like, it's fine. And I was like, no, you should do that. Like, I mean, I remember when you were making it, I could sense that you were getting sort of gun shy about it. And like, we went out to that coffee shop on, 11th and Broadway? Is that one with the downstairs?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, here are like all of the press people you should be sending the book to. Here are the retailers you should be reaching out to. Here are the email addresses of all the pros you should send it to for pull quotes. And you were like so appreciative, and we're like, oh, this is amazing, thank you so much. And then like, you didn't do any of that.
I did some of it.
You did some of it. You sent it out to some pros, and
I sent it to pros.
Wow.
And I tried to do the you convinced me to go and do the retailer thing.
Yeah.
Which was probably good, but then a pandemic happened, so then
the book was paused
for a bit. But no, it was I think it's just that first, I don't know, it's so with 4Kids, I think I was in one of those situations where you don't know what you don't know. It was the sort of thing where I was sort of like arrogant about my stuff. I was like, no, I know I'm good at I know this book is good. Like I felt arrogant about it in a way where it's like, even if people don't like it, I can stand behind it. Whereas with Dead Dogs, I had none of that. It was completely a thing of like, I don't know that it's good. I don't know if people are going to like it. I don't know anything about it. It's a thing where it's like, I liked it, but if everybody hates it, then maybe I'm a moron.
It's weird because you talk about that and like that's a learned thing, but I have that still on things where I'm like, I don't know. Like I had that on Furthest Place where I was like, I really love this. I don't know if it's good. Like I don't know if other people will like it. And I remember talking about that and being like, this feels really personal to me. So it feels like maybe there's an audience of one, and you were like, well, I like it. And I was like, two? Yeah. And I just, and like now Furthest Place is the book I'm most proud of that I've ever done, I think, maybe because of where we're going and what we're trying to do with it and like how we made it and all of it and like what we're accomplishing in the scope and like how we're pushing ourselves to try new things. And all of that has sort of what felt like unsure ground now feels like it opened up a new path for me creatively, and I feel really good about it. And so like it's exciting to me to hear that you have sort of turned a corner on liking feeling proud of Dead Dogs, because I mean I love it, but I think it's interesting that hesitation, I think for me sometimes means you're on the right path to doing things that are good, that you're challenging yourself and you don't know what you're doing. Like there's something sort of great about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting, and I'm working on, obviously Furthest Place, me and Matt are doing a bunch of it, but like me and Matt are doing another thing to the side of that, and I'm currently writing another thing just sort of in my evenings and weekends, and there's a much different feeling this time. I feel a lot more settled. My upset tummy, I drank the ginger ale, like I'm okay now. Like,
you got your Gingerade kombucha.
Exactly.
Sponsor of the show.
So, I mean, it's I don't know what you're at, but for anybody who, is putting out quote unquote their like first book or working on that thing, I think, the advice would be, the nerves are normal. And it's going to be fine. Because here's the other funny thing too, is, it doesn't matter.
Why do you say that?
Huh?
If people don't like it, it doesn't matter?
If people don't like it, don't read your Goodreads. You know what? Even if people like it, don't read your Goodreads. Just don't read Goodreads.
Yeah,
that's probably a good advice.
I had to read my Goodreads recently.
Oh, no.
What do you mean you had to?
Yeah.
I was writing a proposal for a grant. And I went in to be like, this is how it was horrible. And I was like, these are like my average Amazon ratings and these are my good. And like, it was very intense, but also like, I have a weird relationship to my work and to my audience. So like, bad reviews don't bother me at all. Like I find them interesting, and good reviews make me super uncomfortable. And like when people are like, I love this is great, I'm like, but when someone's like, I really don't think they stuck the landing, I'm like, that's interesting, I wonder, like I have a much healthier reaction to bad reviews. So Goodreads doesn't really bother me, but I don't spend a lot of time there. But yeah, I've spent a lot of time there recently, and it was interesting. It's an interesting place. Anyway, moving on. That was too much information about me.
Well, I do have another question about the nerves thing, because Griffin and I are working on our first book right now, and it is at times cripplingly stressful. And what was your strategy there of getting to a point where you're literally sleepwalking because you're so anxious about it? How do you get back to a point where you're in it and you're excited about it and you just keep going?
Lucky for me, the book was done when the first issue was coming out.
Right.
So I didn't have to go back to work on it. I just needed to, stay the course. The honest reason is, and it's a thing, it's going to sound weird, but my sort of mantra is this thing of, think of a needlepoint that spells out nobody cares. It's the sort of like that idea of like when you are awake at 2 a.m, remembering every transgression you've ever caused to somebody by accident, and you have to remember in your own head, those people that you did it to aren't thinking about you. They're thinking about their transgressions at 2 in the
Sure.
morning. And so it's that thing where it's like, it's not that nobody cares, but it's you are just another member of the background, and it's
Sure.
and it's going to be fine.
Sure.
You know, it's just that Matt actually did this is a silly thing. Like I didn't realize that I do this, that I get super stressed out and weirded. But like me and my wife, right before For This Place was coming out, Matt and his partner came to our house to basically put together 2,000 envelopes to send to shops. And they were coming to stay with us, but also my wife was going on a work trip to Paris because she had designed this book for a fashion house or whatever. And I was going to be going with her. And I was like sitting on the couch next to Matt. And I was like getting stressed out about I was like, well, we got to finish all this, but then I got to pack, but then I got to do this thing. And then on the flight, like, I just really hope I don't get to have the runs and this different thing. And Matt's like, whoa. He's like, is any of that happening right now? And I was like, no. And he's like, then what are we worried about? And it's that thing, like Matt's pretty good about he's like, in the moment, buddy, like just day by day.
Oh yeah, I have like real bad stress and anxiety about like work and sort of all the things that I have to do and all the things that can go wrong. And like I have if I don't do sort of certain calming techniques and stuff, I sort of have stress nightmares every night and I freak out. So I have these sort of things, and like a thing I always do is like just like focus on the thing that's directly in front of you. Like there's nothing past that. And when you finish that, then you can assess the landscape and go to the next thing. And that's how I deal with sort of the fact that it's like, oh, I owe 5 people scripts and I have to do this. And like, this thing comes out tomorrow and it sucks. Like people, you know, some hate group is going to fucking start text messaging telling me or whatever it is. You just have to sort of be like, none of that matters, just do your job right now. And yeah. Well, I'm glad that helped you, Tyler, on getting de-stressed before your vacation in Paris.
You sound like you're such a dick.
I don't want to like dwell on this, but I do want to sort of talk about sort of my relationship to the book for a minute, and like sort of your understanding of the book, because we've never really talked about this, and I think it's maybe fertile ground, or maybe it's really boring. Let's find out. It's very strange for me to read Dead Dogs Bite because I see so much stuff that I think of as ours in it. And a lot of that I think is like, there are things where I'm like, oh, that's something we do for kids, or that's something we were going to do in For This Place, or like that's similar to something we do. And some of it I'm like, did I steal that from Tyler? And some of it's like, not did I steal it, but like, did you put that in? And then I sort of am like emotionally claiming ownership because it's in our book. And then there's these other things in it that like feel so fresh and unique to me and so different than what we do. And I'm kind of comparing them in these weird ways. And I don't know, it's a very weird thing because I think the stuff we make together, I have this real personal stake in. And you know, you're one of my closest friends, and I, you know, like we make these things that I think I feel really personal about, and I feel you do too. And then you made this book that is very personal to you, and I can't help but like see our collaboration in it, and also like our relationship in it, and all these other things. And I sort of wonder, do you feel that? Like, do you feel a relationship between this book and our books? Do you feel that I don't think you've ever read anything else that I did that you didn't work on, but if you had read something else I wrote, would you feel like, oh, that's
no,
we do?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I bet you there's things, you know, it's that, for instance, like we've done however many podcasts about 4Kids, and somebody will bring up a joke or something in it, and you and me won't remember who came up with it. And there's definitely things in Dead Dogs where it's like, you know, in some ways I learned how to write by reading your scripts. You know, it was that sort of thing where it's like, that was the most level of professional interaction I'd had with a script was the 4Kids #1 script. Because to that point, yeah, I'd worked on 5 issues of 4Kids, and then I did an issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and then it was Dead Dogs. And that was kind of the path. So in some ways, you know, I think there's it's also just tonally, you and me have a very similar sense of humor.
Yeah.
And so I think you see some of that come through in Dead Dogs, where it almost feels like a joke I would tell you or you would tell me, and yet now you're seeing it in a book, and that's got to be kind of weird.
Yeah.
Because there's the thing where, like, I had, like, for instance, reading Tales of Suspense.
Sure.
Is that what the title? With Bucky and Hawkeye and Natasha.
Yeah.
You know, when you're doing the buddy cop stuff with Clint and not Sebastian Stan, Bucky.
You already said his name. Yeah, Bucky.
Clint and Bucky. It almost like there's a weird. I hear your voice coming out of both of their, and it is a little weird to me.
Yeah. The thing, there's a thing in Dead Dogs where I'm like, I couldn't. It's a super great joke, but I was like, I can't hear the joke in the character voice. I hear you, and it's the pharmacist talking about his hands. Yeah. And then when he's like, "Oh, my clapper," like it just sounded like you to me in a way that was like so jarring and so like weird and surreal.
Yeah.
And funny. It's a great joke. But
his flim flams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's like a weird.
Sorry, I like that joke a lot.
Are you just laughing at your own joke?
I am.
You're such an asshole.
It's a good joke.
No, it's a good joke. The other ones, like, I was trying to figure out, because you have the scene in the movie theater where the narrator opens in the movie theater. Yeah. And we have the movie theater scene in Furthest Place, which obviously came later, but I feel like we talked about before. And I was like, did I steal this from Dead Dogs, or did we come to this separately? Because like I've had that idea for a long time that they live in a movie theater. I was trying to think of the relationship of what, because we
had the conversation where you had wanted a gang to live in a movie theater. I think they were even in our original pitch thing. It was like the Cinema 7 or something like that, and we just never
at that point they weren't in the book, but there was something we talked about. But like when I saw the scene in the movie theater, I was like, this is how I want the movie theater scene in our book to look. And then I was like, did we talk about this? Like, and there's a few things like that where I was like, I don't remember, because you'd done the first issue of Furthest Place before you did,
or the first two.
You did the first issue before you did Dead Dogs.
Kind of. Yeah. They were like they're versions of the first two issues.
Yeah, it was really just the first issue, but it was going to be the first two, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's when you sort of went and worked on the Marvel stuff, and I was like, I'm gonna go do this then.
So like there was things where I was like, oh, did I steal that? Did he steal that? Like, did we come to this together? It's just really very surreal. It feels like watching like a video of like your ex with someone else, and you're like, oh, they danced to the same song. Like, is that song our song? You know,
or it's like how if you're with a partner for a really long time and apparently your faces get more similar from doing the same expressions.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that? It feels like that to me.
Yeah, it's like how you and Griffin look exactly alike.
We're gonna get there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like
I can't tell the difference.
Our heights are gonna meet at some point as well. We're just gonna.
This is the only reason we've been working together, Ethan. I'm trying to steal your height.
Wow,
feeding off of me. Wow,
it's really beautiful, guys.
Yeah, no.
Okay, I'm gonna cough, and then I have another question for you, Tyler. Let's keep them going. We're having a good time. A lot of your books, and some of this is my fault again, there's a lot of, it's weird to interview you because I'm going to be talking about my own work in some ways, and I don't know how to do that and not seem like an asshole, so just bear with me. But a lot of your stuff is about young people, and I'm wondering why do you gravitate towards that? Like, what about telling stories about young people?
Yeah, I mean, it is funny to think you saying you don't want it, but it's like, you know, when I heard the 4Kids pitch, I had heard 3 other ones from you, and not all of them were young people, and I went, oh, that one.
For sure.
And so, it's, I don't know, there's something, I don't even really think about it as young people, if that makes any sense. I sort of just thinking about it as like, this is the story. The, you know, Furthest Place is maybe the closest where it was like, I had sort of wanted to age up a little bit, just so we could deal with some other different like themes, like sex and these things that you obviously you shouldn't do with children.
Yeah.
What a horrifying thing to say. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We're an explicit podcast.
Oh, okay, good.
Oh,
no,
we're
but
explicit now. Nice.
We crossed over mid-episode, yeah.
It was that sort of thing where it's like for kids, you know, it goes back to that idea too, Matt, where you're talking about like things I'm doing in Dead Dogs versus what we did in For Kids Together, where I think we both come at it that we both enjoy sort of like a little bit of decompressed storytelling. We both enjoy doing higher panel count pages. We both are really invested in how the characters are acting, like their action. Like a thing, one of my favorite things that it was when you were working on Kingpin and you were like talking about, you know, the different things you wanted to do in it, and you're like, I remember like, yeah, I keep putting in the stage direction that I always want him to be like dabbing his forehead or like like he's sweating and he's always sort of like so he's always sort of doing something with his action, and like, you know, I sort of I thought that was great, but it was also a thing where it's like I think I naturally was sort of always do. My wife always makes fun of me. She calls it the Tyler Boss hands, because it's like whenever you see like one of the characters acting, you'll go into my like IMAX photo booth and it's just me like poking my like doing, and she's just like so there's that thing where it's just like I think we should have similar approaches, but I think we also have counterbalances too, where it's like I think we both enjoy humor. I think maybe I like to lean a little bit more towards some absurd and surrealist stuff, and I think you sometimes like to lean into more either in the same breath, either sentimental or very violent. Those are like if we're to so it's a thing where I think we have similar storytelling techniques, or not techniques, but like things we enjoy in storytelling. And then I just think we have these other things where it's like they complement each other, and so it's interesting to see like it's not to pull it back, but like, you know, I have read a bunch of your other work, and it is always a little funny to see like weird people be like, oh my god, Matt's work on Hawkeye is so great, or Matt works with Travel Foreman on Tales is so great, and so I'm like, well, those guys are fine, but like I'm Matt's. It's fine, he steps out, we have an open marriage, but let's remember who
It's true. I'm not married to Otto Schmidt or Travel Foreman. That is correct.
No, but it is that thing where it's like, not that you're jealous or but it's sort of funny to be like, oh, seeing how other people play the song, you know.
One of the things about the book that I thought was really interesting, and again I think speaks a lot to what you do and what you're very good at, is the sort of the town or the location as a character. I think Pender Mills is like such a rich town, and it's so interesting. And, you know, it's this town full of weirdos, and like you're telling a story about the sanest person in a town of weirdos, and that makes them seem insane. And I think that is like inherently just a great device, that it's just like, oh yeah, like the craziest person, the sanest person in a crazy town is the pariah, is such a beautiful, unique thing. But the town is so it's such a character, and it's so important, and that's true. I feel like that's true in For Kids, that like you really get a good sense of the town, and like it's definitely, for this place is about location, and it's about the places you grow up. And like I wonder how much of Dead Dogs, like you clearly with Pender Mills, you have this sort of love-hate relationship with this town, and like how much of that for you is autobiographical and is about Buffalo, and how much of that is just like, I think this is compelling storytelling, basically.
I mean, I think, you know, the answer as a writer yourself, you know, it is, that stuff is always, you know, this is the thinly veiled autobio of me.
Sure.
Not that you know, it's that thing where you put that in there of, yeah, it's definitely the relationship I think a lot of people have with their hometowns, where it's, I sort of, I loved growing up in Buffalo until I was at the age in which you're supposed to hate your hometown, and clichely hated my hometown and said disparaging things about it, and moved to the big city to go and pursue my dreams. And now I'm 30 and I live in my hometown again, and I love it. And I can't imagine living in another place. And it's, it's you talk about wanting to write about kids or younger people or young adults, and it's a thing where it's like, well, for Joe's story and that sort of thing, like that sort of endless optimism and pessimism and the same level of seriousness is sort of primed at 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, these sort of coming of age things. And so like to sort of do a story that like, I wanted to tell a mystery story, I wanted to do these things, but then like, as you pull everything from your life, it's I want to talk about this sort of love-hate relationship I had with the town I grew up in. How does that make me relate to my parents? How does that, what's that feel like? It's so funny. The book, it's sort of all about different things like that, that you grow up in these places and you form opinions about them and people form opinions about you. And it's what level of choice do you have in it? What level of biases you have towards it? And I did all that stuff and worked it all out. And then when the book finally comes back out, I'm living back in the town where I was writing all that stuff about it. So it's an interesting, it's the same thing we did with, you 4 Kids is very, very personal for you, specific to even some of the names of characters and different, relationships you have with people in your family. And, but even in that, it was fun to always catch you off guard with references I'd put into, because 4 Kids is fucking Buffalo again.
Sure.
But it's like thing where it's like, Walter riding around with a hockey helmet on as his bike helmet. And Matt's like, what is this? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, that's just what kids did. They couldn't afford 2 helmets. So you had your hockey helmet. And that's what you'd have to wear as your bike helmet. And you're like, I don't think that's a thing, Tyler.
Kids in New York City don't have hockey helmets because we live in a temperate climate. I think it's really funny because it's a place where you talked about before where like your instincts lead more to the surreal and my instincts lead to the overly sentimental maybe, or the hyper violent and disturbing. And I like it's funny to hear you say that because I'm very aware of those distinctions in our storytelling also. But like I write about very personal stuff, but through a veil of a place that's not about me. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in a city, and I always write about the suburbs, and I always write about small towns. And to me, there's a sort of, I don't know, there's a sort of magical realism about small towns that like they're very, like I remember being like 19 and 20 and going on tour across the country with bands and like going to really small towns and like just looking at people and being like, I don't know what their life is like. I don't understand what they do. And I don't mean that in a shitty way of like, what, you don't live in New York. Like, what do you do? Like, I literally would like stare at people and be like, what do you do for fun? Like, what do you do for a living? What do you want to do? Like, it just felt alien to me. And so I write about it to sort of explore like my life transposed to this sort of place that has this sort of element of magical realism to it. And you are writing and making stuff that is about the town you're from, and it's very different. And like, I don't know, I we've talked a bunch about this book that I want to do with you. That was the book we were going to do before 4 Kids. And then, before For This Place, and we switched, but that's in New York City. Yeah. And like, that to me is really terrifying and exciting. And you were kind of like, yeah, it's cool. And I was like, no, this for me is like, I want to do a book set in the city. Yeah. So it's funny to hear you, like, because Pender Mills, like I see so much of Buffalo in it, and I see so much of your sort of love-hate relationship with the town and getting out of the town and all that I really find it fascinating and sort of really deeply moving, because you can see that there's so much of you on the page in it.
Talking about, the sort of almost therapeutic nature of writing, Tyler, is there anything that you kind of like discovered about yourself writing as opposed to when you've just been drawing? When you finally got to putting words down on a page, did you realize something? Like, did something come out and you're like, what the fuck?
A lot of bad grammar, but besides that, it's funny. This is the thing when we talk about too, like demystifying the writing process, and it's this sort of thing where it's like I now have a practice of how I approach it, where it's like setting the table, so to speak, so that you can kind of go into that place. And it's always fun because anytime, for the most part, you know, unless you're having on the good days or even on the only okay days, you sit down and ideas will just wander. You'll be writing something and coming up and you feel these ideas just come on and you go, oh, where the fuck did that come from? And you're like, oh, that's great. Let's put that down. And that's so exciting. It's like, you know, like who needs crystal meth? Like that's like that little high of like, ooh, like that idea like is so great. I will say I wrote all of the first pass of Dead Dogs issue 1 in a like 8-hour sitting. Wow. And I like did it. It was when I was still living in New York City, and I like stood up and I was in a studio and I was going to walk to the train, and I had to like halfway down the block like sit back down, like, and I'd never experienced that sort of like. And I've heard it from my writer friends, like they're like, oh, it was brutal. I'm like, how brutal can it be? You're sitting like you didn't have to like crank your arm or your wrist. You're just tapping away, sipping your. And I was like, oh my god, like no, I like my brain is shot, it's mush, it's fog, like, and I'm gonna fall over from like the type of like mental brain exhaustion. And maybe like a couple months later, me and Matt were in Portland for Image
Expo.
Yes, and Matt was telling me about all the titles he was working on for Marvel. It was like 5 or 6 or something issues he had to basically like get done that month. And I was like, how many hours a day do you write? And he's like, all day. And I was like, you can't do that. I was like, if you write that many hours, like how are you going to relate to humanity? I think I was also pretty drunk. And so I was probably slurring my words towards you and walking around in my Zubas being like, it's weird. You haven't talked about my pants yet.
We don't talk about them.
But it was interesting. I mean, you came back with, you're like, well, if I don't do this, then there will be no books this month on shelves. But it's you know, I don't know how you do what you do, Matt. Like
it's funny because I feel like the thing you're talking about of just like needing to sit down, like I remember the first time I had that, and I know exactly where I was. I had a meeting at the Marvel offices, and while I was at the meeting, my phone just kept buzzing. And I was like, what is this? Like I was not in the office. I was downstairs getting lunch with Jake Thomas, who was my editor. And my phone kept buzzing because I was working on like 4 or 5 books. And I just had emergencies on 3 books while I was at lunch. And so like I had all these people being like, where are you? I need this. And like they were calling and texting. And I was in a meeting at the same company. And I finished the meeting and I got on the phone with a different editor, and he was like, I was like, when do you need this by? And he was like, now. And I was like, well, I'm outside the office. I can be home in 30 minutes. And he was like, can you make it faster? And I was like, no, I live in a certain place. And I was like, you know what? I'll go to a coffee shop. And I went to a coffee shop like on 48th Street, and I, got a cocoa, sat down, plugged in my computer, started working, and I worked from noon and they closed at 11 and they kicked me out at 11.
Fuck.
And I worked just straight, didn't stop for anything. And I got home, and when I was like, I can't take the subway. I'm going to take a cab. And when I got home, I couldn't figure out how to get into my house. I was like pulling on the door and was like, what's wrong with the door? And then I was like, oh, it's locked. This is a building in New York City. The door is locked. Like, but it was like a full minute and a half of pulling on it. And I was like, oh, part of my brain is just like not working correctly. And like, I was like a little bit like, did I have a stroke? Like, what is happening here? But I just like, it was exhaustion. I just had exhaustion from like working that hard. I've learned to sort of do it better so that now I can, do 10-hour days, 7 days a week, or, I work more than 10-hour days, but it work long days every day and not have that happen. But like, there is a level of exhaustion that hits you, and it is very real and very, I was told once shocking. That it's shockingly, it's intense when it happens.
And it's a thing where it's like, when I was joking, like my dad works a manual labor job. Sure. Like my uncles all like, it's this thing where it's like, my growing up, seeing them come home from a hard days of labor, and and mentally the idea to me of like, oh, I live a pampered life. I sit in a room and draw funny pictures, or like I type away at a computer. And to like, I've also worked, like I did landscaping for a while. Like I've worked the 13-hour manual labor jobs. It's the physical difference versus that sort of mental exhaustion. It's crazy how real it is. Because I think naively I would have thought like, oh, like whatever, until you do it, and then it's like, yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, it's like when you finish a really hard Sudoku puzzle.
Yes.
Or if you build a lot of IKEA furniture in the same night.
Then you're wiped for the week.
That's it. That's it.
If I build an armoire, I take the month off. No, I know. I mean, I worked in basically a sweatshop for a couple of years, screen printing, and it was like, physically 10, 12-hour days that I'm, like in 110-degree room doing manual labor, and it was like, it wasn't a sweatshop because I got paid very well, but it was sweatshop conditions. It was like an unventilated, 110, 120-degree room in the summer, 50-degree room in the winter. Like, it was very brutal, and I would never do it again. I hated it, and it was a harder job than writing, and I didn't enjoy it. But I do see the comparison where I'm like, yeah, there are moments where I'm like, the mental exhaustion is very real. You see a help wanted sign on like a rock quarry or something, and you're like, maybe. Yeah. I remember talking to a writer once who was just like at the tail end of a burnout and was like, what do you think a doorman in an apartment building gets paid? And I was like, I think they get paid okay. It's a union job. And they were like, I would love that job. And it was interesting to hear someone who was like a creative person be like, I want to work in this job that is just that there's no creativity to. It's smiling and being nice to people and helping them, and that that's the end. And no one's ever mad at a door. I mean, some people are mad at a doorman, but no one's mad. It's not even like it's not like a retail job where it's like, well, it gets really busy and people freak. It's like everyone you deal with is like, and they were just like, that just sounds really nice. And there was a part of my brain that was like, it does sound really nice to be a doorman. And like I couldn't do it. I'm not that type of. I don't think I have that type of brain anymore for it. But like I do understand the inclination to have, but at the same time, I'm sure a doorman is like, I would love to lie in bed all day and write about the fucking X-Men. And they're probably correct and I'm probably wrong, but here we are.
Fuck you, Matthew.
This is my pathetic way of being like, I have a real job, people. Actually, it's a real job. I'm not just playing with toys. I am just playing with toys, but we don't need to discuss that. So, I have one more sort of question to wrap us up here, Tyler, about the book, if that is okay with you.
Oh, yeah.
And this is maybe a complex one or maybe not. I don't want to give anything away about the book. I don't want to like spoil it. It's a brilliant book. It's a beautiful book, and I love it so much. And like, you have Joe, this character, who's on this very fascinating journey. It's a murder mystery, but there's no body. There's sort of it's very tense, but there's not a lot of violence. It's all this moody, sort of smart stuff, and it's very introspective and very beautiful. And then I read it when it was issues, and I got to the end, and without saying what the end is, it really sort of broke my heart. And I was like, this is so sad. It's a tragedy. And it's really heartbreaking story of like coming to terms with this place that you love and hate, and growing up and growing apart from the people you care about, and having to accept a world that you don't love, and all these things. And it was really heartbreaking and devastating. And then I reread it again for this and had completely the opposite reaction, and was kind of like, there's a lot of hope in there. There's a lot, like that last 2 pages, the letter, I won't say what the letter is, and then the last splash page in the book. And I was like, there's something really beautiful and hopeful in this. And there's something, it's sad, but there's optimism in it. And there's sort of a brighter world. And I am sort of mystified and baffled by this, that I've had these 2 reads, and I don't think either is wrong. And I also spent a lot of time being like, I don't exactly know what Jo does. We don't know what choice she makes at the end. And so I'm going to ask you the question that everyone asks us about 4 kids and we hate to answer, but like, you don't have to answer, but do you know what Jo does?
I do.
You do. Okay. And do you feel like the book is hopeful or sad?
Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, and that doesn't necessarily explain what Joe does, because I could see either answer.
I think I started writing the book from a place of sort of pessimism, and I think that's kind of key to it, and almost a sort of like a little bit of a melancholy, in the way that, like, you know, the Don Draper definition of nostalgia, right? Like pain from an old wound in Greek. And by the time I got to the end of the book, in drawing it and writing it, I definitely, it's more of that optimism sort of creeped into me about it. You know, I sort of joke around to people where, you know, when I was growing up as like a young punk kid, like everything was, I was pessimistic about everything, and fuck the world, it's all bad. And now at like 30, I'm very much like an aspiring optimist, like, or a reformed pessimist. And so it's that thing where it's like, you know, you turn on the news and it's like, man, it is rough out there. But you still got to get up and live your life every single day. And so you got to find the joy inside of it. And so, I mean, it pleases me, Matt, that you kind of had both those reads on it, because I think you can have both those reads on it. And though I know what Joey's choice is, for me, it's what I think, and it's that thing where it's ultimately it's up to the point of her in that situation is more about what it says about the reader reading it than it is about what she does. That's the sort of mechanism I'm trying to do.
Yeah, I you know, it made me to bring it all back to me. It made me feel like
let's talk about me.
Let's talk about me for a minute. It's my podcast. My mom says I don't talk enough on the podcast, which is definitely not correct, Mom. The you know, I was thinking about we had, without playing our cards too much, we had a meeting with some TV people about for this place, you and me, and they were sort of asking us where it ends, and they were like, do you know where it goes? And we were like, oh, very much. And then we sort of had to walk it back, because we were like, well, we know what the ending is to a degree, but we definitely started creating this book pre-pandemic, and we were definitely going to a very dark place, and now we don't necessarily feel good about
that's so interesting,
putting that much darkness into the world,
right? And
like, so we have a different ending that we feel is more positive, and we're going to see where we want to be when we get there.
Wow.
And I don't think the studio liked that answer, but I think we were both really happy with that answer. And then I read this and was like, oh, Tyler did both. Like, he got both. He got the pre-pandemic ending and the post, you know, and the mid-pandemic ending in one book. Like, it has the optimism if you're looking for it, and it has just the pessimism if you're looking for it, and it's really beautifully handled. And like, I don't know, I'm trying to study it and figure out how to land that, how to get to a place where,
well, and I think I feel like we have the action, you know what I mean, in the sense where it's like we at the end of Furthest Place, we sort of we know where kind of the pieces.
We know what the story. We know what the story is.
No, yeah. But it's this thing of where it's like we just don't. I don't think we fully landed on. We have like, man. There was the version of that action that we had originally, and now there's that other version, like the presentation of that action that we now have. It's a very, it's funny how one idea can be so multifaceted in like the sense of like the way it can be approached.
Yeah. I remember hearing someone say that, I don't know who the quote is, but they said, I don't want to fuck it up, but they said, comedy pulls back. At the end of a comedy, the camera pulls back, and at the end of a tragedy, the camera pushes in, and that's it. They were like, that's the definition. You make the same movie, and if the camera pushes in, the person is alone, and it's a tragedy. If it pulls back, it's a universal thing, and it's a comedy.
I said that, Matt.
Yeah, that's right. It was Griffin in conversation
before the show.
Yeah,
Griffin was really smart.
Griffin really smart. But I think about that a lot, about just like, you know, since Griffin said that an hour and 20 minutes ago, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think there's a beauty to like threading the needle there and trying to figure out, you know, I know, you know, without getting into like the Sopranos ending or the, you know, whatever it is, the Lost ending or you know, but they're ambiguous. They're ambiguous endings to a degree. And I think this has an ambiguous ending, and ambiguous endings are hard to pull off. And I think you nail it. And
Agreed.
In doing so, I got to a place where like I'm examining myself and my own feelings and reflecting on who I am, which I think is, you know, the point of all this. It's the point of what we make. It's the point of art. Like, you know, I think a person approaches art hoping that it changes them or tells them something about themselves. And like this book really did that for me. And really, as I read it over time and revisit it over time, I find that I'm different and my reaction to it is different, and who I am is different. And it's showing me that. And I think it's really beautiful. And I just sort of wanted to sort of thank you for it and say how, you know, as a friend, and how proud I am of you of making this book that I love so much, and as a collaborator, how jealous I am that you made it, and all of that. And that's really it. That's really all I wanted to say.
That's really uncomfortable for me to hear, Matthew. Thank you.
Love it. That was the point.
You too. You two are exactly the same.
Nailed it. Fucking got it. Perfect.
I love it.
Well, on that note, Tyler, thanks for having us on your show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This was,
you all were lovely guests. Thanks for not ruining my sofa.
That's another podcast. I think this one was a slam dunk home run. Well done, everybody.
Agreed.
I don't know where you cut that, but
we cut it right in the middle of you saying this podcast was a slam dunk home run.
Because that's not a thing.
This podcast
we'll have you say that, and then it'll be a bunch of air horns.
I love it.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
And that brings us to the end of part 2 of our discussion with Tyler Boss. Make sure to check out Dead Dog's Bite, follow Tyler on Twitter @BoyCartoonist, and keep an eye on this very Ashcan Press Substack to see everything that he's working on. To get the latest episodes of this podcast, as well as news, giveaways, and even comics delivered straight to your inbox, go to ashcanpress.com and sign up for the newsletter. We'll be back next week with another wonderful guest. And in the meantime, you can write to us at ideasdon'tbleedpod@gmail.com, or tweet to Matthew Rosenberg @AshcanPress on Twitter, me @Tales2Astonish, or Griffin @GriffSheridan. We'll include some of your correspondence on the show, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. And big thanks to Summer People for our theme song, Where's the Poison? Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.